This episode of Yesterworld is in part sponsored by all of my amazing patrons, and if you want to help support the making of future content, please check out my Patreon and shop in the description below. And if you enjoy the video, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Ever since the early days of Pixar, the studio has kept up the tradition of not only hiding Easter eggs referencing other Pixar animations of the past and present, but referencing classic movies as well, some of which are incredibly subtle, while others are pretty hard to miss.
I am your father.
And in November of 2004, the studio's highly anticipated sixth feature The Incredibles was released into theaters, quickly becoming one of the studio's most beloved and successful animations. So with The Incredibles sequel finally hitting theaters 14 years later, I thought it'd be fun to go back and revisit the original Incredibles and explore 10 movie references you may never have noticed. It should come as no surprise that with a Pixar film all about secret missions, high-tech gizmos, and evil villains, the massively popular James Bond films would be of some influence.
Bond. James Bond.
Aside from the overall genre of the movie as a whole. While there are similarities between the character of Q in the James Bond films and the character of Edna who is referred to as E, much of the visual aspects of Syndrome's lair and elements of his diabolical plot are directly lifted from the James Bond films, such as You Only Live Twice, which bears the most similarities, as well as other elements lifted from Goldfinger and The Spy Who Loved Me. Additionally, in Die Another Day, the villain meets a similar fate as Syndrome. During the scene in which Syndrome attempts to appear as a hero, he stops a falling truck using his gravitational beam, saving a woman and her baby in the process. This scene may look familiar, as it's nearly identical to the one from Superman 2, down to even the dialogue. Other Superman references include the name Metroville, which is a combination of Metropolis and Smallville, as well as the last shot of The Incredibles, which mirrors Superman's iconic reveal. During the chase scene in which Dash races through the jungle as he's pursued by Syndrome's minions, the sequence takes inspiration from similar scenes in Star Wars Return of the Jedi, as Luke and Leia are pursued by scout troopers on speeder bikes, and The Incredibles even mixes in elements of audio from the Star Wars franchise. The Incredibles does more than just reference movies from the genres that inspired it, but includes a couple nods to director Brad Bird's The Iron Giant, as early in the movie, Bob is reading from a newspaper with the headline of Catastrophe Seen as Crisis Looms, which is a variation of the same newspaper headline as seen in The Iron Giant, and uncoincidentally was another variation of a newspaper headline as seen in the 1955 Disney classic Lady and the Tramp. And later in the movie, Mrs. Incredible announces her call sign as India Golf 9er.
Island approach, India Golf 9er checking in, VFR on top, over.
And when taking the first letter of each word, this translates to IG-99, referring to the Iron Giant, which was released in 1999. During the scene in which Mr. Incredible is struggling to remember Incrediboy's real name, he calls him Brody.
You're that kid from the fan club. Brody.
The name Brody might sound familiar if you're a fan of Kevin Smith's 1995 comedy Mallrats, which features a character named Brody, played by Jason Lee.
Brody, man, what's going on? What, do you work here now?
Oh man, just hanging with TS.
And in The Incredibles, Jason Lee just so happens to voice Buddy, aka Syndrome.
Buddy?
My name is not Buddy! And it's not Incrediboy either!
If you watched the standoff scene between Frozone and the police and felt it seemed familiar, then you're also probably a fan of the action film Die Hard with a Vengeance, as the scene is almost a shot-for-shot recreation.
I have to answer this phone, alright?
The Incredibles doesn't just reference movies in recent decades, and you might find a couple shots taking you back through memory lane, as the sequence in which superheroes are being shamed in the public eye is taken directly from the 1941 classic Citizen Kane. A bit later, when we get a look at Bob's workplace at Insuracare, one of the angles is a throwback to the iconic shot in the apartment. And finally, the scene in which Mr. Incredible stops a train from reaching the gap in the tracks is a direct reference to the original King Kong, and coincidentally is also very similar to a scene in another superhero movie that also released in 2004, Spider-Man 2.
Coincidence? I think not!
During the sequence in which Helen loses control of the plane, if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, this might seem pretty familiar, as a very similar sequence plays out almost identically in his 1989 fantasy romance, Always, which just so happened to star Holly Hunter, who provides the voice of Elastigirl in The Incredibles. While The Incredibles is full of movie references, it also contains a number of television show influences as well, such as the evil robot spaceship in Jonny Quest, one of the vehicles used in Thunderbirds, along with a self-destructing message inspired by the Mission Impossible series. Believe it or not, there are even more movie references within The Incredibles, so for number 10, I'll quickly give you another 5 back to back. A couple shots from the movie Speed are given tribute. Syndrome's line, "I'm your number one fan," is a direct reference to Stephen King's Misery.
I'm your number one fan. That's how I'm your number one fan and all. So I told you I was your number one fan. I'm his number one fan. Since I was his number one fan, I just want to tell you I'm your number one fan.
That's very sweet of you.
The scene in which Mr. Incredible's car transforms is nearly identical to Men in Black. In The Incredibles, the word Kronos is used as a password, in which the 1957 movie of the same name also features a giant machine falling from the sky and destroying a city. And finally, Elastigirl looking in the mirror, mirrors a shot from Disney's Peter Pan. Thank you all so much for watching, and to avoid missing out on future content, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if you want to help support the making of future videos, check out my Patreon and shop in the description. And as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Yesterworld.